Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about communication with your boss. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how can a programmer effectively communicate to their boss that their idea may not be feasible? So I would say that the best way for you to do that is to get to a point with your manager where they trust your perspective on matters. And then the second part is, can you communicate to a person in such a way that they feel that they comprehend the rationality behind your thinking? So let me dive into that a little bit. So the reason I argue that both of these two are necessary is because usually when you're dealing with an individual who may or may not know anything about the area that you are an expert in, because just as when, let's say, take myself as an example, when I go to my doctor, I don't know medicine, and that means that I'm very susceptible to emotional things, basically because I don't really know if a disease is serious, or like if I have some aches or something like that. I don't know enough about the topic. So when my doctor talks to me, of course, everything, like, because I perceive this person as being an expert, anything that they tell me is going to basically just be me taking their word for it. And then, if, as you can imagine, if I trust my doctor and I have a good relationship, I'm more inclined to believe them regardless of what they say. They could, in theory, make up anything, as long as I don't. That's the second part. But like in theory, they could be making up anything. It's the same thing with you as a software developer, where when you're telling your manager that a refactor, for example, is super necessary. Well, how would the how would you convince someone about of that? Like, because your manager doesn't know they don't even know what a refactor is, and they have no idea. Or let's say you go to a mechanic, and the mechanic says that it's going to cost this and that much to fix your car. Well, if you go and talk to one mechanic and they say that it's going to cost, I don't know, 10,000, and then you go to another mechanic and they say, oh, it's going to cost 5,000, and then the third mechanic and they say it's going to cost 100, like whatever, if you're getting different numbers from different people, how will you know who is right, who to trust? Well, in this scenario, you're probably just going to go with the one who pays you the least. But the same thing goes for software, where if you talk to one developer and they say there's no problem with the code, and then another developer says it's a massive problem, we have to fix it, and so forth, it's very difficult for the manager to figure out who to believe. And as you can probably imagine, that is something that is pretty gosh darn common. A lot of software developers have different perspective of. A classic one is this legacy code? Does it need a refactor? Well, if you ask 3 different developers to look at the same code, depending on their value system and how they define legacy and also their experience level, things like that, they might say different things. So for you to communicate to your manager that you need a refactor, or in this case, that they have an idea for how to build something, they're going to have to trust you. And the way you build up that trust is by, like, one part is the soft skills, of course, that you actually have to have a good rapport with your manager. But the second part is that you build up trust over time. You show the manager that your way of thinking is aligned with their value system. You communicate to them in an efficient manner. You make sure that results are happening, that you have something to prove that you're actually usually pretty good, like you meet deadlines, you do well with stakeholders, you speak. The best thing, as I like to say, is to speak the lingo. If the manager feels like you behave like an expert, just as I've said with the doctor, or in other cases where I talk to anybody who is an expert, and it doesn't just mean a software developer, I'm talking like in the industry, the most assuring thing, quote unquote, an expert can do for an audience is to behave in a confident, relaxed, and professional manner, because it makes people feel emotionally like this person knows what they're talking about. The second part is that you have to be able to well, sort of speak the lingo, or as I like to say, you have to be a good mentor, teacher. You have to be able to explain your rationality in the for the things that you're saying, basically. So let's say that your manager comes and says, "Oh, we're gonna build this feature," and you sort of know that it's probably not gonna work out. Then first and foremost, make sure that you have that rapport and you have your communication in place. Don't just say, "Oh, that's an idiotic idea," or so forth and so forth. Just say, "Okay, uh, I'm thinking that we should consider these things," and then you simply present your arguments just as you would for anything. Like, you try to detach yourself a little bit. Don't get emotional. Like, keep calm, so forth and so forth. Don't call people stupid. Don't attack their idea, like them as an individual, or so forth and so forth, regardless of how you feel. Because, as I've said before, guys, frustration doesn't lead anywhere usually. Like, getting upset or like belittling people, it very rarely gets you to where you want to be. What you want to do is to treat it very much as I said, like a debate or something similar, where you're just going to present your arguments. And so you start by trying to explain the context. As I've said before, guys, like, domain knowledge is very important here, and that leads to, as I said, that ties into the expert thing, as I was saying. If you can very clearly say to your manager that, well, our system is, for example, very legacy, or that it has a poor performance, or things like that. Considering these things, your idea may work, but you must also think about A, B, and C, and so forth. Now, we don't have a really concrete example, but I'll give you a concrete one that sort of ties into something that I've done with like a manager at one point. So I had a manager not that long ago who came to us and wanted to build a new system. It was a basic CRUD application in essence, and this person had a background in software engineering, so they had designed basically a full-scale microservices architecture with a Kubernetes cluster, multiple region support, and so forth and so forth, like the whole shebang, basically. And so the thing that they wanted to build, literally the thing that they wanted to build, was 2 web pages. One showed 3 visualizations of diagrams, basically a dashboard of metrics, like in a basic line graph. And there was another one that uploaded a file. And so what I said to this person was basically like, yeah, you're completely correct. Like, microservices, it's a very good architecture and so forth. But my first question was, how many users do you expect us to have on day 1? And he said, well, probably just myself and maybe 2 people. So about 3 people. And I said, okay, so we're going to have 3 people. So could it be the case that maybe going with the full-scale microservice architecture from the start is a bit much upfront, because there's not a load issue. There's only 2 or 3 developers who are going to work on that, so it's not like you have a problem with collisions in the source code or things like that. It could be simpler to simply ship one single monolithic application to start off with, and then scale into microservices when we actually see that sort of growth is necessary. Because if we start immediately with the thing that you have shown, it's going to be a lot longer for us to get something out the door. And considering that the application itself is a fairly simple sort of application, it might be too big of an investment up front. We can of course also make sure that we don't have any scaling issues, because we understand that going forward the system is probably going to grow, and so we can create a basic architecture, a modularized monolith, as I like to call it, where we can split out the different areas of the domain into separate services once that need occurs. Now, the thing that for those of you who've been working for a while, like, you've probably have heard this before, where you have like someone comes in with this big gigantic super system, but they're actually, like, we're talking about something. I have personal projects that are more advanced than this. So what you do there is that you take the role of an expert, you present your arguments and your rationality for thinking the way you do, and then you just present it. That's all I usually do. And if that is not enough, sometimes you have a really opinionated, like, diehard person, then if people are not going to listen to you, then just do whatever they want. Like, it's at the end of the day, as I like to say, guys, it's not your code. It's their code. Like if they want you to, it's like going to a customer who, if you're going to build a building or something like that, if they come to you and say, hey, I want you to build my new house in clay, and you go, yeah, but maybe bricks would be better. They go, no, no, it has to be clay. Okay, I'll make it in clay. It's going to cost you this much. So what I want you to take away from this is that the two things I suggest that you do when you're dealing with a manager who, and you want to, in a good way, communicate that they're not, like their idea might not be so feasible or so forth, is that first and foremost you have to establish trust. It's important that your manager feels like you have good ideas and that they're willing to listen to you and so forth and so on. And that's the soft skills, talking the experience and speaking the lingo, and of course ideally in every company have a little bit of a track record of conversations and good interactions with people and so forth. The second part is to explain your arguments, your rationality for the way that you are thinking. Don't attack people and say that their ideas are stupid or something like that. You just present the perspective that you have to offer and explain why an idea might be good in a given in a certain situation. And then, as you did in my little story here, say that because it is microservices is a very good architecture, but maybe not in this specific scenario, and explain why in this specific scenario it might be things that you have to do things differently or think about other things and so forth. So you don't say that it's just a bad architecture. You don't just like give a sweeping gesture saying, generalizing, oh no, it's a bad architecture. Explain why you believe that, because if people can follow your train of thought, it's easier for them to digest. And in many cases, they will realize an error in their own thinking, or they might correct you in your way of thinking and realize that your rationality might not be 100% correct. Have a great day.